Hello, fellow Robo Capitals. Hope you're well. So we got big news out today. The inflation data, the PCE. We need to check it out and then determine what this means for federal funds rate, for the Fed dropping rates, pausing, increasing rates. Who knows what they're going to do? But this will likely impact their decision-making process. Although I don't think it'll impact their decision-making process as much as the last GDP report, the initial claims, and more importantly, what happens next week. We'll get into that in just a moment. So the punchline here is the inflation data came out pretty much as expected. So when you look at the thumbnail and say, well, George, this changes everything. What does that even mean? See, we have to go back and look at the initial claims and the GDP numbers, look at what happened today, and then analyze things in its totality. That's the key here. That's the key. So let's go to the trusted calendar, Market Watch. Thank you very much. And let's rewind. Let's rewind to, first and foremost, Wednesday. So it's not like the Fed is ignoring the housing data. Now, you guys know from watching my videos, the the new home sales, you're like, whoa, 800,000 when the expectation was for 649. Holy cow. But then you look underneath the hood and you're like, ooh, yeah, yikes. The only way they got there is through these interest rate buy downs and massively dropping prices. Massively. But you guys watched that video, I'm sure. If you didn't, go to the Lennar website and type in Houston, Texas, or Tampa, Florida, and just look at their homepage. And you're going to see price drop after price drop after price drop. And I'm not talking $5,000. I'm talking $50,000 price drop, $75,000 price drop. Just check it out after this video. But then I think what's way more important is we have a 218 on the initial claim. So the Fed, you have to look at it from their standpoint. They've got the dual mandate. So it's either, are they going to put more emphasis on the labor market or on inflation? So if the labor market is deteriorating and they think there's less of a risk of inflation, they're going to be more dovish. But if the labor market is very strong and there's more of a risk that inflation starts increasing by their measurements, then they're going to be more hawkish. That's kind of the way it works. So going back to the last non-farm payroll, you guys know what happened. You were watching my videos. I mean, we got a horrific number. And then we had the downward revisions on top of that. Then we had the benchmark downward revisions on top of that, that brought the jobs down by almost 1,911,000. So now all of a sudden, the Fed has to be on the side of, okay, we got to focus on the labor market, therefore dovish. But then you get the pumping the brakes, the screeching halt, when you see the initial claims go from 264 or 260, something like that. I think that was a high going back 3 or 4 years. And then we get the 235 or 232, excuse me. And then this last time we get a 218. So it's like, whoa. We thought the labor market was our biggest concern. We thought that it was deteriorating, but now all of a sudden, hence this changes everything, we've got to consider the fact that maybe the labor market is a lot stronger than we thought. Now, the reconciliation, now I'm not saying this is my view, and the reconciliation between the non-farm payroll, the household, the ADP, and the initial claims, this is a total head scratcher. This is a head, even for me, I'm like, how does that work? I mean, obviously the labor market is deteriorating when you look at the household survey, the establishment survey. But, and even if you want to say, well, it's just all the foreigners leaving. Okay, well, fine. If it's the foreigners leaving, then those jobs should have been filled, right, by Americans or people who are here and are like, hey, or they're here legally, let's say. And they're like, hey, I'll go ahead and take that job. So if you have those jobs decreasing, then you should have a net inflow and then you really shouldn't have it shouldn't impact it. Uh, the net shouldn't change. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But let's just assume that all those immigrants left and the employers haven't been able to fill those jobs. Let's just say that's the reason why you have negative payrolls. Uh, okay, but then how is that good for the economy? We still have minus a million people or minus 10 million people that were working and spending money here to a certain degree in the United States, and they're no longer doing that. So that's, I think, on net, that's going to be a drag to the economy for sure. So this is where I think the Fed, before this initial claims, and before you had this revision to the GDP from 3.3 to 3.8, I think they could easily and confidently be on the side of the labor market weakening, therefore dovish, looking at it through their lens. But now that this is like, whoa, okay, forget it. And they're waiting for the PCE numbers that came out today, which were right in line with expectations. So we had personal income up, we had personal spending higher. Then we had PCE month over month at 0.3, with the year over year 2.7, core 0.2 month over month, and year over year 2.9%. So if this would have been, let's say, a very dovish number, or would have come in much lower than expectations, okay, now you're back to, all right, it's probably, we got to focus more on the labor market because inflation isn't that big of a problem. Again, looking at it through their lens and this 2% target that they have, completely arbitrary, by the way. Or if this would have been, let's say, way, way higher than it was, okay, now they've got to completely shift their focus from the labor market over to fighting inflation. So the fact that this came out at pretty much expectations, I think makes you default back onto the initial claims and the GDP, which changed things substantially from the last non-farm payrolls. That's what I think this is all about. So then you look into next week where, let's go back up here. We have on Tuesday, we've got the JOLTS numbers. Remember, that was a big miss last time. We have the ADP numbers. That was a big miss last time. We have construction spending. We have initial claims. We'll have to see, right? And then we have the biggie. The establishment survey and that household story survey. The expectations are for 45,000. Now, even if that came out at 45,000 and met expectations, oof, that's still a terrible number for non-farm payrolls. And if it's a lot worse, then obviously we get a decline from there as far as the expectations for the labor market. But I think the key here, once again, is going to be the revisions. What is that going to look like for the last 2 months of the survey? Next week's really, really going to be huge. So right now, let's look at the Fed watch. We've got 87% that they're going to cut. And this is in about a month. And we had 91% that they were going to cut. That's really interesting, isn't it? Huh. So 1 month ago, we had a 43% chance they were going to cut. Then we get the non-farm payrolls, and then it's, whoa, where did that come from? Then the probability of them cutting goes, and I'm talking about this again in about a month, goes to 91%. And I would have assumed that it would have gone, well, I guess it went down slightly, but not that much when we got the initial claims and the GDP. It did go down as far as the probability that they cut, but I would have thought it would have gone down even more. So the market isn't giving a lot of weight to those two data points, although it's factoring it into the equation. So now let's look at rates because often that tells a very good story. And let's go back, 5 days or so, because you can see what happened when we got the data for the initial claims. It's just you see this big spike, boom, and then it kind of just digests a little and sinks in. But you're going to see something similar with the 2 year and something similar with the 30 year. Now, let's zoom out here. We'll do a year to date. And actually, I want to go over to the 2 year because that's going to be more of a reflection of kind of what Fed funds is going to do. So we look at a year to date on the 2 year. We can see this has gone up slightly, but not a lot. I mean, even from, it really tanked, obviously, when we got that last non farm payroll and it got down sub 3.5. Now it's back up, call it 15 basis points or so. Not a lot. Not a lot. So here's the bottom line. If we get lower than expected on the non-farm payrolls, and especially if you include the JOLTS and the ADP. Remember last time this came out, the JOLTS numbers was terrible, the ADP number was terrible, and the non-farm was terrible. So if we have a trifecta, if we have another trifecta, then whew, boy, you're going to see the 2 year go down probably, I would say, sub 3.5. Now, the interesting thing is what happens to the 10 year. That probably goes down a little less. I think you get a bull steepener there. If it shoots a lot higher and is consistent with what we saw in the last initial claims and GDP, then I would say you probably get maybe even a little bit of a flattener in the sense that the 10 year probably goes up a little bit, but the 2 year probably goes up even more than the 10 year. So we'll have to see how this plays out. It's really interesting. Next week is going to be extremely, extremely important. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Enjoy your weekend. As always, make sure you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and we'll see you in the next video.